NVIDIA, we'll look for some potential all-time highs. BofA does go to 190
there
today.
keeps being these sellers at 140, and they just won't relent. And they ought to go rethink their whole game plan. They should go read the conference call of Taiwan Semi, and they would know that it's foolish to sell. Druckenmiller with a cry in the beer about wishes that he hadn't sold it. I don't get the sell call here.
Yeah.
Because this is, remember, one of the things that was mentioned by Dr. Wei on the Taiwan Semi was he's saying it's incredibly early. And yet people are selling NVIDIA. It's incredibly early. And I remember talking to Jensen. I mean, we were like 3 trillion, 4 trillion. He's not thinking about that. What he's thinking about is creating robots that are going to deliver you inexpensive coffee from maybe even Starbucks with Brian Niccol there.
And we mentioned the Melius chart today, looking at OpenAI's new product, where Ben Reitz says that as inference moves to video and reason, it's going to prompt infrastructure upgrades pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, and I was going back and forth with Ben. He's pure joy. It reminds me that it's very, very bullish for NVIDIA and also, he says, for Lisa, for AMD. And I totally agree with Ben. Ben's got a beat on a lot of things. And the companies really respect Ben's work, just so you know. And I'm not just partial to Ben because I like his father. Who's a great chemical analyst. I'm partial because he's must read. And he's distinguished himself in the group by having the most cogent recommendations, and he's quick. It reminds me of Katie Huberty when she was doing her Apple work, and that's like about as high praise as I can get, because like Katie Huberty was a deity, and now she does the charts. She's a deity, and Ben, I think, wants deity status. Got to work. Got to work hard to be deity.
Speaking of expectations, which are not really low, and that's NVIDIA. The price target today gets raised to 190. At BofA, it was 165. Generational opportunity is how they call it, because of the competitive lead that they have now. They talk about recent industry events. They talk about the underappreciated enterprise partnerships and software offerings, and the ability to generate $200 billion in free cash flow over the next couple of years. You want to address this? It's been a reasonably volatile week.
Yeah.
ASML hurt. Taiwan Semi helped. Pick your story on whatever side of the ledger you want to be on as it relates to that. But they are now neck and neck. Apple and NVIDIA are in terms of what their overall market caps are. Apple's still the biggest, but NVIDIA is right on its heels. As of the close yesterday, we're looking at 3.36 for NVIDIA, 3.53. For Apple, those are skewed a little bit to the upside on both accounts today. There's 3.60 trillion for Apple, 3.38 trillion for NVIDIA, but it's getting there, and people think it's going to because of the generational opportunity that some suggest they still have.
Yeah, and I thought it was super interesting, like the ASML report, which was concerning. You saw a lot of the semis pulling back as a result. And then you see Taiwan Semi, their print, which was a blowout print, and then all the numbers start to push right back. I think about one of the things that Steph said earlier, when you think about just all the beltways that lead back to NVIDIA. If I think about the power grid as an example in data centers, all the build and all the raids we're talking about with data centers and how much we need to build, where we need to find land for these places, all that goes into chips, right? The chips are what fuel the data centers, and beltways all the way back to NVIDIA. So when I think about free cash flow going forward and all the opportunities and all the catalysts, it's hard to fight this stock. It's hard to fight and say, wait, you know what? It's gone up too much. 180% is too much, or whatever. It's still a great opportunity.
People have tried to fight Apple. They've lost. Right? They've been put on the canvas.
All right, we start with NVIDIA. Why not? Which is trading higher on a bullish call. BofA Securities raising its price target on the tech giant to $190 from $165, reiterating its buy rating. The firm calling NVIDIA a, quote, generational opportunity with a huge competitive advantage in a growing market. The stock already up nearly 180% just this year. And that's after last year, where it's something like tripled. Now, here's the analyst behind that call, Vivek Arya. Vivek, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Tyler, thank you for having me.
You know, I guess the question in reply to the idea, I have no question that NVIDIA is going to be a great company for a long time to come. But it has already had that generational moment, it would seem to me. So how do you see it moving multiples higher from here, generationally, I suppose?
Tyler, let me actually tell you a story first. The first commercial internet service started in the US in 1989. Amazon started in 94, Google in 98, and Meta in 2004. The point here is that you don't just have 1 or 2 year technology cycles when you are investing in these real big changes to the technological infrastructure. And we think generative AI is one of those really big technological changes that is going to take time to play out. It is true that it is insanely computationally intensive. You need a very strong linkage between the silicon, the system, the software, the developers. They all need to come together. But this is not something that will just start and end in 1 or 2 years. And specific to NVIDIA, in the last 2 weeks, we had the chance to meet with, we had the chance to interact with and listen to a number of companies in the supply chain to their competitors. And what is coming out very loud and clear is that the opportunity is much larger. Their competitive position is much stronger. And then finally, when I look at the stock, right, we have a stock that is trading less than 1 times earnings growth. And if you were to take an average of the other so-called Max 7, they are trading at 1.9 times their average earnings growth for next year. That is why we think that we are in front of a large opportunity. The company is executing well, and the valuation is very compelling, even at these levels.
Vivek, let me ask you, today's interesting because NVIDIA is doing well, but the rest of the semis are actually struggling, and the stocks is lower. What explains that?
Yes, Kelly, I think, this week we had the start of earnings. We had one very tough report from ASML. Then we had a very strong report from TSMC. Next week, we will have a number of other earnings reports from semiconductor companies. And the challenge the industry is facing is that this, one shiny area of AI is doing extremely well, but it is less than 20% of the overall industry, whereas the rest of the industry, which has to do with industrial and automotive and PC and smartphone demand, that is just not doing as well. So I think it's possible that investors are taking a wait-and-see attitude before we get into the heart of this earnings season. So I think it's that kind of very normal earnings volatility that we usually see.
Yeah.
How wide and deep is the NVIDIA moat?
Sure. So what I think AI is telling us is that it is not just good enough to be a chip maker, right? That you need to make sure that you can scale these chips across a system, that you have software that can be optimized to deliver the best computational performance, that you're taking care of all the energy, right, and the power requirements, that you're working at scale with the supply chain in Asia. And then importantly, that you're working with an enterprise ecosystem. A few days ago, we saw NVIDIA signing the relationship with Accenture, who will train thousands of people to go and deploy NVIDIA-based systems. So I think it takes that end-to-end knowledge, and only one company today is able to deliver that. And this is not something you overcome in a day or a year or 2 or 3 years, because NVIDIA has been investing in this kind of silicon and software right from the days when they were just a gaming company. Their core operating system called CUDA came out over a dozen years ago. So that's the kind of advantage and lead that they have built, both in terms of their early investments in software and today their scale and incumbency and partnerships with a number of these enterprise software companies and consulting companies.
I just wonder, sort of a last question, Vivek, if the company is inherently cyclical and if there's been any kind of pull forward in demand just to make sure that people have what they need, are we going to look to the other side of that? And I don't know if that's in 3 or 6 months' time or maybe beyond that window. But a lot of people who are bullish say they literally don't think it's going to be a cyclical business like many of semiconductors have been through time.
No, I think every time, we forget that semiconductors are a cyclical industry. They have a way of rudely reminding us that it is a cyclical industry. Usually, these cycles tend to last for 4 years, and where the time to make money is the first 3 years. So last year, we had a very strong year. This year is a very strong year. We think next year can be a very good year. And then the cycle potentially rolls over in 2026, right? But I think it's only to refresh and then get on to the next technology trend. So we do think there is at least about a year's worth of investment left in this upfront infrastructure deployment that semiconductors are such a critical part of.
All right, Vivek, thanks for joining us, making the
Thank you.
bullish and generational case for, or at least the case until 2026 for
Yes.
NVIDIA.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P finished the day up 0.4%, and NVIDIA finished the day up nearly 0.8%. I want to mention a few things about NVIDIA. I'll start with what happened this week, and then I'll talk about what's ahead for NVIDIA over the next couple of weeks. So this past week, we got a really bad earnings report from ASML. ASML manufactures some of the machines used to manufacture semiconductors. But ASML made it very clear that the reason for their bad earnings was a slowdown in non-AI chips, and they affirmed that AI and data center were very strong. Then later on, we got Taiwan Semiconductor's earnings, which were very, very good. Remember that TSMC manufactures NVIDIA's chips, and so this is very relevant to NVIDIA's next earnings report and the production ramp of Blackwell. And I want to point out one specific thing about TSMC's earnings report. Not only were the numbers great, but this earnings report also represents quarter-over-quarter revenue growth acceleration. And this is such an important point. Back when NVIDIA reported earnings on August 28th, the stock reacted poorly because it appeared that NVIDIA's growth rate was slowing. And although NVIDIA's growth rate technically did slow during last quarter, it was all because of the delay in Blackwell. Following NVIDIA's last earnings report, I said numerous times in many videos that the deceleration in revenue growth was due to the delay in Blackwell, and that I thought we could see NVIDIA's growth rate reaccelerate in the future once Blackwell is shipping in volume. And this earnings report from TSMC seems to be in agreement with that statement. If TSMC is seeing revenue growth acceleration, then that means NVIDIA likely is as well. And all of this is happening at the same time that we are getting confirmation that NVIDIA's customers are receiving and starting to use Blackwell. I bring this up because I think this may be the reason for TSMC's revenue growth acceleration. If it is the reason for the acceleration, then that means NVIDIA's growth rate could reaccelerate as Blackwell production ramps up over the next few quarters. Remember that back at NVIDIA's last earnings conference call, we were told that Blackwell would begin shipping in Q4, and NVIDIA was expecting several $billion of Blackwell revenue in the first quarter that it ships. Well, here we are still in NVIDIA's fiscal third quarter, and we have confirmation that Blackwell has already begun shipping. This is ahead of the schedule that NVIDIA provided at their last earnings call. This means two things. We should see some Blackwell revenue show up in NVIDIA's next earnings report. And secondly, if NVIDIA is ahead of schedule in their production ramp of Blackwell, then that means they are likely to guide Q4 Blackwell revenue higher than they already have. We are currently expecting about $3 to $4 billion of Blackwell revenue in Q4. And so, if NVIDIA guides Q4 Blackwell revenue noticeably higher than $3 to $4 billion at their next earnings call, then I think the stock likely trades higher on that news. I'm still cautious about adding to positions in this market in the immediate short term because we are so close to early November. Back in 2016 and 2020, the market traded lower right before the election, reaching a relative low on the Friday before election week. This year, that would be November 1st. I don't know what will happen between now and November 1st, but I am cautious in the immediate short term just in case. If we get a dip between now and November 1st, I would most likely use that as a buying opportunity because back in 2016 and 2020, the market began trading higher during the actual week of the election and rallied into year end. Now back to NVIDIA. I want to remind you of a couple things. Next week, NVIDIA is scheduled to host an AI summit in Mumbai on October 23rd through the 25th, and CEO Jensen Huang is scheduled to speak on October 24th. So mark your calendars for that. NVIDIA stock reacted very positively during NVIDIA's last AI summit, so that is something to bear in mind. Additionally, we have some very important earnings reports next week and the week following. We get Tesla on the 23rd, Alphabet on the 29th, both Microsoft and Meta on the 30th, and Amazon on the 31st. You may recall that I recently said in a video that Amazon would report on the 28th. I want to apologize about that because that was a mistake. The date was wrong on Earnings Hub, but it has now been corrected, and I double-checked Amazon's investor website just in case. Amazon does indeed report on October 31st. All of the earnings reports from the companies I just mentioned are very important for NVIDIA because these are NVIDIA's largest customers. The ideal scenario would be for the hyperscalers to guide CapEx spending higher and also communicate to investors that they are starting to see a return on their investments into AI infrastructure. Don't be surprised if NVIDIA is volatile over the next couple weeks as the hyperscalers report both earnings and their forward-looking guidance for CapEx spending on AI. And so those are some of my short-term thoughts about NVIDIA. Now looking at NVIDIA with a long-term perspective, I am bullish on the future of this company. I seriously would not be surprised if NVIDIA doubles over the next 2 years given NVIDIA's current growth trajectory and upcoming product cycles. Demand for NVIDIA's products is so great right now that NVIDIA is quite literally selling everything they can make. Additionally, we have a very clear product roadmap for the next 2 years. This year, we get Blackwell, then Blackwell Ultra in 2025, and later on, Rubin is scheduled to arrive in 2026. NVIDIA has a very clear runway to growth ahead of it for the next 2 years. As long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their CapEx spending on AI, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. I think NVIDIA's brightest days are ahead. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you all so much for watching these videos. And with that, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.